My friends, welcome to another Last Week on Earth special guest interview. I am very excited to be with all of you. I can't wait to bring my guest on, so I will not pause any longer. I will just introduce her and then have her join the conversation. Riane Eisler is a cultural historian, system scientist, educator, attorney, speaker, and author whose work on cultural transformation has inspired scholars and social activists. Her research has had an effect in many fields, including history, literature, philosophy, art, economics, psychology, sociology, education, human rights, organizational development, political science, and healthcare. Oh, is that all? Could she affect more parts of our world? That would be nice. Why is she resting on her laurels? She's also the winner of the 1992 Shaler Adams Foundation Award, the 1996 ERA Education Award, 2009 Distinguished Peace Leadership Award, 2013 International Women's Leadership Pioneer Award. I am incredibly excited and honored to have here on the podcast my friend Riane Eisler. Riane, hello.
Well, hello to you too, Ben. Good to be with you.
It's so good to see you again. We met in a very random place, of all places. We met in the woods of New Hampshire
Yes,
at the Bretton Woods 75 conference.
right.
Could you tell people a little bit about what the purpose of that was and why you were there?
Well, I was giving a keynote address on this conference, which commemorated and contradicted the 75-year-old Bretton Woods conference, which got us GDP and all kinds of other strange ways of evaluating economic and social health.
Yes, it was. And so the purpose of this weekend that we spent, it was during my presidential campaign, and I was there trying to dive deep into the economic systems that hopefully will be unfolding as the future comes to us. And it was exploring all different ways in which we can redefine how we count success financially, how we count our financial systems. And that's been your life's work. You've worked on that for no less than 35 years.
Absolutely, and I'm still working on it. You know, it is work that we all need to get involved in because the COVID-19 pandemic really has shown how lack of resilience, lack of anything. I mean, the injustices, the gaps between haves and have-nots. So it's time for a new economic system, starting with whole new way of thinking about economics.
It is indeed. So can you tell us how you see that? Because I've been working with you ever since Bretton Woods. I've been part of your task force trying to help figure out exactly how to implement what you term the social wealth index around the globe and to change the way we count what counts, really. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I certainly can. Well, let me start with how we're doing it now,
Please.
Which I think many of you know, GDP. And GDP is weird. I mean, you know that selling cigarettes, the resulting health costs, the resulting funeral costs, they're all great for GDP. Oil spills, GDP goes up because
oil spills are great for the economy.
Oh, they're wonderful for the economy. You know, the cleanup costs, the depositions, the lawsuits. But not only does GDP actually include as positives activities that harm and take life, it fails to include, and this is really ludicrous, by the way, it fails to include the activities of the three life-sustaining economic sectors: the household economy, you know, where children are cared for and are, educated to a large extent, the volunteer community economy, and the natural economy, even though without those three sectors, there would be no economy. So obviously there is something very wrong. And that's part of what we talked about at the Bretton Woods conference where I first met you, and to sort of jump to some tools for changing that, because we value what we measure and we measure what we value, or at
Hmm.
least we should, right? I mean, as
Yeah.
I said, we really don't. We have
We
a
measure what we value, that we're doing, but we are not really valuing what we need to fix it. I got a little confused in that sentence myself, but the point is we have to start valuing, we have to start measuring the things we truly value is the real goal.
and the social wealth index, which derives from the social wealth economic indicators that we at the Center for Partnership Studies launched several years ago, show the economic value, just in dollars and cents, of caring for people starting in at birth and caring for nature. And as I said, uh, this must be counted whether it's in the market economy or in the household or the activities of the volunteer economy. So we've been really uh, measuring the wrong things, and it's this work is kind of like turning reality right side up.
But Rianne, first of all, I take issue with this because we love being upside down in our world. We prefer to see things backwards. It's easier. It's easier to get out of bed when you're upside down. You can just roll right out of bed. So I don't think you're taking that into account. And when you say we should count the caring economy, the caregiving economy, the volunteer economy, those economies don't pay people anything. So how do you count it? How are you going to count things you can't count? What is
How
the
do you count it?
approach?
Well, it is being counted in the nations that have the highest happiness reports, that regularly rank high in the World Economic Forum's global competitiveness reports. They pioneered policies like generous paid parental leave for both mothers and fathers.
I
They
like that because I'm
pioneered
never going to be a mother, so I'm interested now, and you got my attention.
they pioneered universal health care. They pioneered subsidies for high quality childcare. My latest book, as you may know, is called Nurturing Our Humanity. It came out last year with Oxford University Press. And what it, of course, shows is very relevant to the post industrial new economy. Both socialism and capitalism, they came out of 1700s and 1800s. I mean, they'd be obsolete on that count alone in a
Yeah, we do.
post-industrial age.
I love that you use the phrase, you say, we cannot run our modern world on a centuries old operating system.
That is absolutely correct.
I think that's a
So,
brilliant way to look
and,
at it.
and the COVID-19 pandemic is an opportunity to really re-examine, reassess, and reconstruct.
So how do you do it? Because you got my attention right back when you said that other countries that have pioneered this are being in a lot of ways more competitive than us. I'm competitive. I'm an American. I want to always be competing against somebody. So how can I keep that competitive edge? What is it that you see with this opportunity? Obviously, it's a reset on so many things. We are stuck in this terrible pandemic, and we want to figure out a way that we don't fall into the same holes again. We want to figure out how we're not going to get stuck again, where all of a sudden you need emergency subsidies because we're not already paying people for the work that they do from their home, the work that they're doing to help people. So how do we implement it? Is one step a UBI, a Andrew Yang-esque universal basic income? What are the first steps that we do?
Well, first of all, we need to really change how we measure economic success. And that's where the Social Wealth Economic Index comes in.
The sways.
The SWAYS, right, and the Social Wealth Index. We also need to reward this work. You made a very important point. Uh, we need to redefine what is productive work. And in our knowledge service era, the most productive work, despite the fact that in both capitalism and socialism is relegated to, quote, reproductive work, is
Right.
caring for people starting in childhood. So we have that high quality human capital, right? Flexible, creative people. We know from neuroscience that whether or not we have this largely hinges on the quality of care and education children receive early on. The first 5 years, that's when our brain structure is laid. And it happens in interaction with our environments,
You hear
which
that, Carmel? You just mentioned about brain structure getting laid, and I just like to focus on anything even similar to that. So, how do you count it though? How do you count things that don't have monetary amounts? How do you
they
count?
do. They do have monetary amounts. For example, a you know, you really have to keep up, which unfortunately our economic schools are having a hard time doing because they're, stuck, just like the culture is stuck in so many ways. But a recent Australian study showed that if the care work performed for free in families were counted, it would constitute 50% of the reported GDP. I mean, that's huge.
That
And,
is.
we have to change our thinking, because one of the reasons, of course, that this work was not considered productive by either Adam Smith or Karl Marx is that they came out of a time when it was supposed to be performed for free by women in male controlled households, so much so that, for example, if a woman was negligently injured, she couldn't sue for her injuries. Only her husband could for
Right.
loss of her services. That's the
Wow.
kind of thinking we're still replicating, and
Hmm.
it has to stop.
Hmm. I couldn't agree more. We've been working on it. I mean, obviously, it's your life's work. I've just been trying to help out when I can on your task force meetings and brainstorming and trying to find ways to get a measurable model that we can implement globally. And certainly, we need it here in the United States. It's the plan is to not replace GDP as a measure, correct? It is to create another equally important measure that we count alongside it, a social wealth index in addition to a gross domestic product.
Well, first of all, gross domestic product is a mess and it needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
But this said, uh, we are seeing this movement towards really counting what counts in our lives. You know, uh, what kind of education our children get, what kind of care. I mean, the yearning for caring connection is the most basic human yearning, contrary to what we're told. And I'll digress for a moment.
Please.
But neuroscience today shows that the so called pleasure centers in our brains light up more when we share and care than when we win. That's not the story we're told. We have been told so many completely erroneous, false stories. And that's why I've introduced, I mean, just to back up a little,
Please.
I've introduced a whole new way of looking at society that goes beyond right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, capitalist, socialist. Because,
Mm-hmm.
if you really think about it, there have been repressive, regressive, violent regimes in every one of our conventional categories. Moreover, and this is basic, every one of these categories either ignores or marginalizes nothing less than the majority of humanity, women and children.
Mm-hmm.
By contrast, the new way of looking at society I've introduced, the domination partnership social scale, is a holistic analysis. And if we look at the whole picture now, including where we all live in our family and other intimate relations, we begin to see connections. We see that it's not coincidental that the people who want to push us back towards more domination, more top down control in both the family and the state or tribe, for them, a top priority is always going back to a so-called traditional family, which isn't even traditional, by the way. I can get to that in a minute, where what is it? It's an authoritarian, rigidly male-dominated, highly punitive family, which is foundational to domination systems. So if people learn to devalue women, as they do in this family, they also learn to devalue caring. So there's always money, right? For and this has nothing to do with women or men, okay? But for the stereotypically, and they're very rigid gender stereotypes in domination systems, there's always money for prisons. Well, what's that? That's the
And
punitive
for-profit prisons,
and
no less.
for-profit prisons. Well, but you think about it, it's the punitive male head of household that is a pillar of domination systems. There's always money for weapons, for wars. It's another pillar. The hero as killer. Uh,
And
in
yet we
our age,
underfund our education systems. We underfund. I mean, California is where I live is 51st in the teacher to student ratio out of the states of our country, including DC. It's 51st in librarian to student ratio, 51st in counselor to student ratio. I mean, we are not investing, and California is the fifth biggest economy on planet Earth. We're not investing even in the things that are easy to pump money into. So my question is, how do you convince, because I do agree the world would be so much more enlightened and beautiful and wonderful and smooth and chill if we were able to shift into a partnerism mindset instead of this domination, subjugation prism. But when the people in power are the dominators, how do you convince them to let go of that control?
well, the first thing is showing them that the present system, which the COVID-19 pandemic really has done, that the old normal is not something we can go back to. Okay? It is not resilient. It is leading us to destroy our life support systems, the inequalities between haves and have nots, and hence the turmoil in the world is rising. Whereas if you invest in caring for people starting in childhood, you can have a much more successful economy where you really have humans redefine what is productive work. And I mean, my work really puts reality right side up.
Which is actually good. Once we're upside down, you can roll me right back into bed. So that works well for me. So tell me then, in your dream scenario, if Riane Eisler had her way, what would the steps be to change the way America and the world does business, does our thought process, but in a very practical way? How do we implement this new system? What's first, an SWI, and then please go ahead.
Well, I've really identified four cornerstones as foundational to building this better, more caring, more equitable, and yes, more affluent future. Because, domination economics create artificial scarcity, not only by misdistribution to those on top, not only by channeling so much of wealth into armaments and then the destruction that they cause and the wars and all of that, but also by failing to invest in caring for people, educating people in the things that really count. So we would be really, it's a question of priorities, and we have this hidden system of gendered values. So these cornerstones are not the same ones that you're used to thinking of. One is childhood. I already said neuroscience shows that our brains are not fully formed as we're born. They develop in interaction with our environments, which for us humans are our cultures, and they're very different depending on where it falls in the partnership domination scale. So we know today that the so-called traditional family, which Hitler wanted to reimpose, which Stalin wanted to reimpose, which Khomeini reimposed, which ISIS reimposed, which the Taliban want to reimpose. I mean,
Mm,
this is not coincidental. Or the rightist fundamentalist alliance here in the US, or Mr. Trump, who keeps talking about dominating, that's the only thing that counts.
right.
Uh-uh. There is another alternative to either dominating or being dominated, and that's the partnership alternative, where when you have a hierarchy, it is a hierarchy of actualization
Mm,
rather than domination. We need new words.
right,
New
right.
thinking.
So the way you start doing it, you talk about, you create new metrics that account for caring for people on the planet. You then show that there is financial and social return from investing in that kind of economics. And then
Absolutely.
once you do that, we now have shifted our priorities so we can much more effectively address things like poverty and the disproportionate poverty of women and children, because we realize that actually is to our economic benefit. And it's not theoretical, right, Riane? It's that those things literally, those women and children then get to go and once their contributions are valued properly, the whole society rises, right? Rising
Well,
tide rises all ships.
rising tide does raise all ships. And studies show that the status of women, and because of, I said, of this gendered system of values, which not only devalues women, but the priorities, that the status of women is a very powerful predictor of general quality of life, which
Mm,
is what we're really talking about. But see, the old priorities simply are suicidal. If we don't take care of our life support systems, well, we're not going to have life support systems. It's that simple.
yeah, I mean, we're running out of resources to support basic life at all because we refuse to open our eyes and to follow the science. I mean, we have a president who says, I don't think the science knows." That's a quote from his mouth just a couple of weeks ago.
Well, I mean, Mr. Trump is going to dominate now the coronavirus, which is fascinating.
Yeah,
I
yes.
mean, magical thinking is what it is.
It's both an
Because
invisible enemy and he's going to dominate. He's going to be swatting. I could picture him
that's
in a
right.
week or two just swatting at the air.
Absolutely. Well, he has been, unfortunately, dominating a lot of people with the
Mm.
power that he has.
And our entire national consciousness he's dominated to show how
Well,
effective that domination mindset can be.
not our entire
Fair
national
enough.
national consciousness.
40% of it. But more than that, I mean, he's dominated the psyche of, I would say, 80% of the country.
Yeah, but that's because of the four cornerstones. Because as if you grow up in a domination environment, you learn two very important lessons here. One is that it's very painful to question authority, no matter how unjust. And
Mm,
so, what do? You can't, your pain, your anger, the people who are inflicting it on you, can't turn it against them. You are taught to scapegoat the other, whoever the out group that your leader tells you.
sure.
And that is also the model that we have for our species. I mean, if you have a model where the female form and the male form, there are lots in between, as we know now, but the male and female form are the two basic forms. And if you rank one over the other, you learn to equate difference with either superiority or inferiority, dominating or being dominated, being served or serving. So whether it's Shia against Sunni or Sunni against Shia in the Middle East, whether it's racism, whether it's anti-Semitism, it doesn't really matter. It's this crazy, unrealistic
Yeah.
scapegoating that's built into the domination system. That's why we
Yeah.
have to pay attention to these four cornerstones of childhood, gender, economics, but an economics that goes beyond capitalism and socialism, and also, of course, story and language.
Yeah. The
And we
narratives
are
that we
beginning
tell.
to do that. We're beginning to do that.
In what ways do you see it? Because I fully agree. People are are people. And I don't know why it's such a difficult thing for the planet to grasp that we are all 100% equal. We are born equal. That never changes. And I think Shia and Sunni is a great example of how granular we get in our desire to dominate and feel superior over another group. I mean, they're the same religion, and their entire split, their schism, is because they believe that the cousin of Muhammad one day said this, and then he became that, and it's such a historical minute point that creates warring factions forever. So where are you seeing us change it? Because I want hope on that. I need hope.
Well, but look at how many people are investing in non-governmental organizations that are helping not people that you're related to. I mean, the selfish genes and original sin story are the same. I don't know why they fight each other. We're bad. We need to be controlled rigidly from the top, right? But no, it's true. I mean, if you really think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So what you really have to do, look, Einstein said it. He said you can't solve problems with the same thinking that created them.
My
So
favorite quote.
we've launched a make partnerism mainstream campaign, and you're part of it. And one of the tools is, of course, the social wealth index, which we're developing. But there are a lot of tools you can, in terms of parenting, you can download the Caring and Connected Parenting Guide from, I'll give you the website, centerforpartnership.org. It's for free in both English and Spanish. Uh, as far as gender, my God, I mean, the whole conversation now about Me Too and, but it's still marginalized. See, and what we have to understand is about this hidden system of gendered values, that it is not just, quote, a gender issue or just a women's issue, which is idiotic anyway, considering that women are half of humanity. It's a key social issue.
And considering it's even proven more so by the Me Too movement, because it actually now affects men as much, because the careers are taken down by behavior that doesn't respect the equality of the full spectrum. And so that's proof positive that the way you treat other genders affects you very directly. You don't have a career if you do it wrong anymore. And that's a big positive move towards it, but it's still seen as the split.
Well, but you see, the domination gender stereotypes have deprived both women and men of their full humanity. Men, if they are sensitive, if they're caring, what are they? They're wimps, they're sissies. And women will call them that. They're not, quote, real men, because a real man, the way you tell a real man in the domination system, he's not like a woman.
Right.
And women, of course, are deprived. If a woman is assertive, she's a ball breaker, she's a bitch. I mean, the whole thing is crazy.
And in fact, it's the exact opposite. I've always said that it's one of the biggest problems to me in society, and I'm certain you will agree with this, is people's inability to admit a mistake. It's this fragile, they think it's this great, strong sense of ego and sense of self, but in fact, it's so fragile to not be able to admit a mistake, or to be malleable, or to let your partner take control, or to be able to have an ebb and flow and a give and take in the way you exist. That in fact is so weak. And people think it's strength. That's the big misprogramming of our old systems that have said from the beginning that if you don't have this machismo, or if you don't have this particular way you appear to the world, then you aren't the thing that you're supposed to want to be. And so you're less than. And it's a way to keep people in these specific zones and these specific archetypes of behavior that do not allow us to naturally evolve.
Well, and I want to emphasize this. Caring is not just a women's activity, it's a human activity. And we all have this yearning for caring connection. But in domination systems, when you are brought up in a rigid domination family, caring, whatever caring you get, it is also mixed up with coercion. And so you begin to get this bizarre dynamic of denial, of scapegoating, of in-group versus out-group thinking. That's why we have to pay attention to the whole system. but we don't have to start from square one. If you look at the modern progressive movements, they've all challenged the same thing, a tradition of domination. Whether it was the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule their quote subjects of the Enlightenment, or the feminist movement challenging the so-called divinely ordained right of men to rule over the women and children in the castles of their homes, or whether it was again the so-called divinely ordained right that the abolitionist movement, the anti-colonial movement, the uh, Black Lives Matter movement challenges, of a quote superior race is supposed to be divinely ordained to rule over a quote inferior one. The movements uh, for against top-down control for social and economic justice, the movement against violence, not just warfare, but the very, very important movement of recent years when we've documented the pandemic of violence worldwide against women and children. That has to stop for the reasons that I gave. Because, what do children learn in that kind of family? That it's okay to use violence to impose your will on others. All the way to the environmental movement challenging our once hallowed conquest and domination of nature, which at our level of technological development and of population, could be the end of our species. So the domination system is reaching its logical end.
Mm.
But we have an alternative. And this is why we've launched the Make Partnerism mainstream movement, because it's not enough to critique. You also, to deconstruct, you also have to reconstruct. And that's where the four cornerstones come in.
I love that. I love that. So deconstructing is how you figure it out. Reconstructing is how you build the new paradigm. And that's where we are. You seem so hopeful. You've just outlined how much progress you think we have made, because I think sometimes we get so stuck thinking that we're almost taking a step backwards or these things are insurmountable. You have a lot of hope. You think we're getting closer and closer. Now it's just what's left, just getting the governments to officially start embracing these metrics so that we can shift funding that way and that we can shift what's left.
There's a lot left, because if you look at these progressive social movements, most of the energy and the resources have gone into trying to dismantle what I call the top of the domination pyramid, politics and economics as conventionally defined. Far less energy has been put into shifting from domination to partnership in these four cornerstones: childhood, gender, economics, to take into account the value of care work, which we see writ large now during the the COVID pandemic. And yes, story and language. Linguistic psychologists have told us that the categories provided by a language channel our thinking. And this is so true of the conventional categories a colleague of mine calls right, left, religious, secular, capitalist, socialism, etc., weapons of mass distraction,
Mm-hmm.
because they fragment our consciousness. So that's why we need a
100%.
new language of partnerism, of the partnership domination, social scale, of the difference between hierarchies of domination and hierarchies of actualization. Because look, we need parents, we need teachers, we need managers, we need leaders. But how is power conceptualized and exercised? And how does accountability just flow from the bottom up and respect and benefit, or does it go both ways? Is it power over, or is it power with, or the use of our creative power to
Mm-hmm.
really create not a perfect world? I mean, nothing, the perfect is really the enemy of the good if we hold ourselves to that standard, but to create a more equitable, more caring, more peaceful world. And that, uh, I'm not saying that it's going to inevitably happen, by the way. I am saying that if enough of us really continue the work of moving towards partnership and pay attention, really close attention to these four cornerstones of childhood, gender, economics, and story and language, we can avoid further regressions. If we don't pay attention to these cornerstones, we'll continue to see regressions. And you see how bad things get, don't you?
100%. We're living in a world of discord that is so easily exploitable by somebody as stupid as Donald Trump, who is able to just see the tribalistic nature and weaponize it. And so, while I completely agree that this future is possible, it seems that the when we exist currently in a domination subjugation paradigm, it seems so difficult to break out of that with a kinder, more caring model, because by definition it is much more calm, and passive isn't the word, but it certainly is not dominant or aggressive or violent. And then people can be violent and dominant and aggressive and lying and deceitful, and they can control the day and control the narrative, and they use much more aggressive techniques, and that seems to win so often. So when we're a couple of weeks away from a presidential election that will determine the future of the country and the world, what are the techniques we can do to win when winning often takes an aggressive approach?
Well, does it really? Do you know that, and this is documented in Nurturing Our Humanity, that for the past several centuries, nonviolent regime changes have outnumbered violent ones? Look, the struggle for our future is not between right and left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern. It's between the domination and the partnership system. There are trends towards partnership. I mean, the whole questioning of gender stereotypes and of men, not just women, questioning these old stereotypes and these old relationships. The whole movement towards authoritative rather than authoritarian parenting. There are many things, the economics, I mean, the recognition that we've got a crazy economic system which is not resilient, which really does not reward what we need to reward. I'm not saying I don't believe in magical thinking. I don't believe it's going to happen overnight. But I'll tell you one thing. When I get depressed, and I sometimes say it as a joke, but it's not a joke, I think of the European Middle Ages. Why? Because not so long ago, we had in the West societies that look a lot like the Taliban. The Inquisition, the Crusades, the witch burnings. Nobody had any rights. Women, children, forget it. I mean, sages even argued about whether woman has a soul like man, right?
I mean, I think the jury's still out on that one, but the rest I agree. I'm kidding.
So what I'm trying to say is that, yes, we have moved the needle somewhat, at least in some world regions. But this is the time for a unified partnerism movement.
I know we're over time a little bit. Do you have a few more minutes? Because I just have a few more questions, and I'd like to read some from the audience.
Minutes. Of course, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Riane. So, there's so much. There's just so much. What do you think about UBI? Is that a great first step towards?
I think that the problem with UBI is that just not changing our values and not rewarding what really counts is not going to change injustice.
And so you think that it has to actually pay money to parents who are staying at home with their kids, and it has to pay money. Does it have to be based on the caring activities or the nurturing of our nature? You get money for that? Is that why you don't want a blanket amount?
Look, I have to tell you something. People say that you should do this work for free, right? But the problem is we live in a monetized society.
Right.
We need money to put a roof over our heads and to put food on the table, okay? So, of course, the policies that we need are, just for starters, paid parental leave. We should have caregiver tax credits. We should have high quality, the studies are so clear that money invested in education, it is much more cost effective to invest it in the first 5 years and really pay the people and train the people who do this than it is for university. I mean, we've got to really start standing reality right side up
Mm-hmm.
and pay attention. I'm not saying that it's going to happen overnight, although I think that there comes a tipping point, a point where enough people are changing their parenting, where enough people are changing their thinking about gender, where enough people are beginning to understand that this gendered system of values is nuts. It's our heritage from more rigid domination
Mm-hmm.
times.
I even feel terrible that I'm taller than you in this video right now. Let's see if I can fix that. Look at that. How's that? I feel much more on the same level now. I was not trying to take a dominant position. It's just how my chair is best for my back. Please understand.
Listen, Ben, you are a partnership man, and I appreciate that, and I enjoy that, and I enjoy your humor very
Thank you
much.
so
Too
much.
bad that you couldn't win the presidential race. I
I
mean,
know.
what can we do?
I tried. SWI would have been implemented very fast. You donated to my campaign. Thank you so kindly for that. I have a question from Chris LaBelle, who asks you the following. Riane, as a teacher, I wonder what you recommend for fostering a classroom environment that encourages students to feel more compelled to live a life giving back to others.
My goodness. Well, I wrote a book on education years ago, and you might want to look at it. It's called Tomorrow's Children. And it's in print. All my books are available, online and what have you.
How many books? 17 books you've written or something?
I don't know, whatever, you know. Well, because I'm a systems person, so I don't just specialize in economics or specialize in education. I see the connection.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the nation Finland, which has really ranked always on the highest for education, for kids taking tests, for example, they pay their teachers well, but it isn't only the pay, it is that they value their teachers so that kids want to be teachers. I
Mm.
mean, so when you ask me, I think of three things in terms of education to help kids. One is partnership process, one is partnership structure, and the third is partnership content. You have a lot of control over the process and the content, not so much over the structure, although you can structure your classroom in such a way that there can be peer teaching, for example, where the
Mm.
kids, because the best way to learn really, as you know, is to teach. You have to know what you're talking about. And if kids are empowered to take turns, not all the time, I mean, you don't want that, but to participate, uh, if their voices are heard, and if they can also make and enforce some of the rules, which is one of the successful things in the anti-bullying campaigns, as you know, has been to really have the kids become part of the solution rather than the problem. But we're talking about process now. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Content, the stories you tell, uh, we have been told the wrong story for millennia, much, much longer than the 5 to 10,000 years of so-called recorded history. Uh, we lived more in partnership, and you can get that in my books. But biology is beginning to change. Neuroscience is beginning to change to recognize what I said earlier, that we're actually wired more for caring connection. But if you're going to survive in a domination environment, we have a very flexible brain, right? And between families, education, religion, politics, economics,
We have a lot of stuff in there. A lot of it's garbage too. So we definitely have room.
yeah, so definitely. So I'm so glad you're asking that question. And that's really the first step, isn't it?
And
Um,
then Tam Brown asked Riane, which of your books would you suggest I start with first? I mean, obviously, your landmark book is The Real Wealth of Nations. You see the cover right here if you're watching this on video, which you said about it. You called it that because the real wealth of nations consists of the contributions of people, and it is not sheerly economic. What would you recommend to people as far as
Well,
where to start with
the
your
book
writings?
that I'm probably still best known for is The Chalice and the Blade. And
Mm-hmm.
that book is now in its 57th US printing and its 36th foreign edition. And it tells a different story. And that book came out 30 years ago and it's still
Wow.
completely relevant. In fact, science is catching up. We know now from anthropology, from archaeology, from DNA studies, from linguistics, what I just said, that for the vast majority of our human cultural evolution, not ideal, but we oriented more to more egalitarian, gender balance, and more peaceful, less violent societies. Some violence, of course, we lose it sometimes as humans, but it doesn't have to be built into the system, the structural violence.
Yes, it
To
doesn't need to be. I
maintain,
killed a guy earlier today, but structurally we shouldn't do it.
that's right. Well, we have it built in to maintain these rankings of domination, ultimately maintained through fear, through abuse, through force.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Which hopefully we don't see when this election results are tallied as it comes in. They're planning on trying to undermine the very nature of our democracy and are not assuring even a peaceful transfer of power, which is mind-boggling. How do we?
it is mind-boggling, but not really surprising because the domination system is still embedded very strongly in a good part of, quote, domination traditions. And we've all internalized some of these traditions. Let's just face it. But
Mhm.
you asked me about what book. It depends on whether you want to start with my latest book, Nurturing Our Humanity. The subtitle will tell you what it's about. It's
Let me see if I can pull that up right here. Hold on a second. Uh,
okay.
there we go. This you can see right there.
And you see the subtitle, How Domination and Partnership Shape Our Brains, Lives, and Future, came out with Oxford University Press. I've been working on it for about 7 years when I invited Douglas Fry, the anthropologist, who is a world authority on foraging societies, which is how we lived for millennia. And he calls them the original partnership societies. So I invited him, among other reasons, because he knows so much about neuroscience too, to be my co-author. So you can start in the middle, you can start at the beginning. It doesn't really matter.
I
But
love
this last book really does end with the four cornerstones. Because the first, and you might love my book, Sacred Pleasure, which is, well,
that's your erotic novel, obviously, right?
no, it's an
Oh.
erotic, it is not a novel, although it has a lot of uh, elements of novel in it. It's about sex, myth, and the politics of the body. And it's about how both sexuality and spirituality are constructed very differently, along with everything else: politics, economics, families, you name it, depending on where a society falls on this partnership domination scale. So you have really a feast of reading ahead of you.
I love that. Chris LaBelle is suggesting you and I run for president and vice president together in 2024. Would you be interested? I'll take that as a maybe. So we're gonna wrap this up right now, and I just want, if you could, let me ask you one more question from Jessica Keibel, and then I would love for you to kind of summarize what you would like to leave us with. But Jessica Keibel asks, what guidance would you offer to someone in their early 20s who's choosing a field and wants to make a genuine impact in a lifetime?
My goodness, what a lovely question. You know, I think that um, there's so many technological breakthroughs, and if you're interested in technology, you can really have an impact. Take AI. I mean, the issue really isn't the technology. The issue is how is it programmed for
Right.
domination or for partnership. I don't know what your interests are, but follow your heart, because your heart is that question says, I want to make an impact. I want to change things to make them better. And that's our hope for the future. And it's grounded hope because, look, human societies, economic systems, they're human creations. We can create better ones.
I
And we
love that.
need you and we need your generation. I become part of the partnerism movement. Go to the following website, partnerism.com.
Or .org. It's right there on the screen.
Oh,
Both.
.org. Excuse me.
Or
Thank
is
you
it
so
just
much.
.org?
I'm
No worries.
glad one of us is knows the website here. Yes, it's partnerism.org.
It's right there on the screen.
And form a group with your friends, with your colleagues, with your acquaintances, because this really is the future we need to build. And we have to pay attention to what really has not been paid attention, not coincidentally, by the way.
Yeah, because the power structures want to keep us down. It's not an exaggeration that the man wants to keep you down, and it often is the man, almost always.
Well, and but the system has been terrible for men. I mean, I really want to say that for, I mean, take warfare. I mean, all these poor guys who had to give their lives because some guy on top wanted more real estate. I
You're right.
mean, historically, it's been a
Quite literally
disaster,
real estate.
quite literally. I mean, it has really been crazy. So, but we can make a difference. And I welcome all of you to be, yes, human agency. And so join, make partnerism mainstream.
Yes, make partnerism mainstream. I love that. So parting thought. So partnerism.org, we have to check out. We have to check out your books, The Chalice and the Blade, The Real Wealth of Nations, your newest book, Nurturing Our Humanity. What thought, what message, if there's one takeaway you really want to make sure people take that's concrete, that they can try to implement in their lives to move us towards this future, towards this new system, what is it?
Well, it is really very simple. It is that we do have human agency, and that these economic systems, political systems, family systems, they're human inventions. And we can move them in a partnership direction. Look, none of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. Wherever you are, it can start with changing the conversation. It can certainly, at this time, it's important to vote, but
Yes.
also to change people's thinking. Think partnerism.
I love it. I love it, Riane. I was so excited when I had the opportunity to bring you on the podcast because you're one of my favorite people I've ever met, and you're one of my favorite minds I've ever gotten to listen to, and to be able to work with you has been one of the honors of my lifetime. So thank you so very much for sharing your time with us and your message, and let's cheers and hope and move towards a more inclusive, caring, sharing future.
Yes, and I thank you, Ben, and I've really enjoyed talking with you and also talking with the people who have been listening, watching, and contributing questions and comments. So thank you all.
Absolutely. Thank you, Riane. And to all of you, thank you for listening to the podcast. And until next week, this has been Last Week on Earth.